For my section of the project, I did the interviews in comparison with the United States sections. So in my interviews, I interviewed two non-evangelical members of the Savian community, as well as two evangelical church officials, one regional here in Sevilla and one a member of the national organization. Um, my regional non-evangelical interviewees were a professor of history and a theology student who were also able to give a bit of a difference in perspective from different generations, but who both still had academic interest in the general area of religious studies. So they both agreed that the evangelical church plays a very minimal role in Spanish society. It does not have a very strong social, cultural force compared to the Catholic Church. Although the theology student did note that there is um, a very prominent increase of the evangelical community in social and spiritual counseling, and but just generally that Spanish society really isn't shifting to being more religious. If anything, there is any sort of religious shift in Spanish society is a move towards the secular and not towards another religion or another branch or denomination of Christianity. Um, they agreed that there is generally just kind of social indifference towards the evangelical church, although there is some skepticism. Nonetheless, they agree that there is greater social acceptance in more urban communities such as Madrid. Um, Whereas the professor kind of contributed this or attributed this rather to just the diversity that exists in cities and their general social acceptance of people from different backgrounds, whereas the theology student focused more so on the role the media played in kind of convincing more conservative rural populations of having a bit more mistrust towards people who are perceived as non-Catholic, non-Spanish, and that don't embrace those full Catholic Spanish traditions. Um, Nonetheless, they agreed again that immigration has played a very prominent role in the increase of the evangelical community here in Sevilla and in Spain in general, especially people coming from Latin America who are more likely to have evangelical beliefs. But they also spoke about the importance of proselytization and conversion efforts that the evangelical church has made in more marginalized communities, especially such as the Roma community here in Madrid, or pardon me, here in Spain and in Sevilla, that is has since become overwhelmingly Protestant, overwhelmingly evangelical in their beliefs. As far as my interviews with the evangelical church members, they said first and foremost that their mission is to spread the gospel and to build community through social action. So this kind of goes back to what the theology student was talking about in the importance of spiritual and social counseling and connection. Um, and it kind of marks a difference between evangelical theology and Catholic theology, where evangelicals are much more concerned about a personal relationship, a spiritual relationship with Jesus, as opposed to the more regimented, structured approach of the Catholic Church. Finally, the evangelical church officials also spoke to the importance that immigrants have played in the building of their congregations, but also said that they wanted to make more inroads into the Spanish mainstream society, but that they felt challenged by public perception, and felt challenged by kind of how Spaniards generally viewed them as unfamiliar, um, and not fully embracing kind of traditional Spanish Catholic beliefs. Um, so moving on to my section comparing the evangelical church here in Spain and Sevilla with the U.S. Um, Obviously, the evangelical church in the U.S. has a much longer history born out of the Protestant Reformation movement across Europe in the 13 colonies, which kind of bubbled over into the First Great Awakening in the U.S., where many people converted to evangelicalism or started attending evangelical churches hundreds of years ago, to the point now where in America, 1 in 4 people, or 25% of the population, would consider themselves evangelical, as opposed to just 2% of the Spanish population. This speaks kind of to the difference of evangelicals as an in-group in the US and an out-group in Spain, where there really isn't enough concentration of evangelicals anywhere in Spain to really have a strong social influence, even if they have somewhat big communities in Madrid or Andalusia. It just does not compare to regions like the US South, where there is giant numbers of evangelicals who influence daily political, social, cultural, religious life in and out. Um, so finally, I wanted to touch a little bit on the political influence of evangelicals in the US and Spain. In the US, evangelicals have a long history of political involvement in supporting things like the abolition of slavery and preaching the social gospel, and more recently taking a bit of a rightward shift towards uh, right-wing populist politics and their support, especially among white evangelicals in the South in particular as well, for President Trump and the large voter constituency they make up therein. Um, Comparatively, in Spain, there really isn't a strong enough social cohesive force to influence Spanish politics like that, and they really only come up when talking about issues of religious expression, freedom of religion, especially prior to the 1978 Spanish Constitution, adopted after the death of Franco. So, thank you very much.